pleasure. I'm going to introduce Bob Michel. So just a little show of hands here. How many folks here read the DARC report on a daily basis? How many think that it's one of the most valuable intelligence across the lab industry that's out there today? Also, do you subscribe to the daily, the DARC Daily? You should. He's got a very excellent blogging system. Bob and I have been companions, both believers in what he does and what we do here at Pathology Informatics for a number of years, and I'm really pleased that Bob is going to come shake things up. I think we may need the lavalier mark. You walk around, or if you need to just do it this.
I can walk around.
All right, we need that lavalier mic back up because Bob is a wanderer. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I have to say, I'm very honored to be able to address you all today. You are on the front edge of all of what's happening in pathology and laboratory medicine. And I'm not going to presume to enlighten you on some things. Rather,
Wait a second to get back there. I'll turn it on.
not a problem.
You can use a pointer until I get back there.
Mm-hmm. What I'd like to do is take you up into the stratosphere and have you look at the overview of what's happening in healthcare. The last few days, we tend to focus on what's going on in the laboratory and how we can step up and serve what's changing. And so the genesis of this presentation is a piece that I wrote in the DARC report earlier this year, and Bruce Friedman called me up and he said, you know, the way you handled that list of 10 tech trends, I think would be quite good food for thought for pathology informatics. So that brings us here today. Okay, so there's three things that I'd like to share with you in what we're going to talk about. First is, how many of you know about the Institute of Medicine's new report that was issued September 6th about change in healthcare? Raise your hands. So this will be new information for most of you, and I'm going to open up my session with that. Then we're going to look at top 10 healthcare trends, and I'm going to frame where these came from and why I thought they were interesting. And then we're going to look at what's happening within the laboratory space relative to those trends. So this is the IOM's new report, and titled Best Care at Lower Cost. And notice the tagline, The Path to Continuously Learning Healthcare in America. Now this is the piece that I want you to focus on. Policymakers have decided to push us down a new path, which is continuous improvement, and you've heard this for the last few decades relative to W. Edwards Deming and Toyota and what's happened in the manufacturing world. Now, why do I think this is a seminal thing? How many of you remember To Err is Human in 1999? And in that document, it said that there are between 44 and 98,000 hospital inpatients who die each year because of medical errors. And would you agree that we look at medical errors much differently today than we did since the issuance of that report? It was supplemented with Crossing the Quality Chasm in 2000, which was a discussion about how do you frame and measure quality in healthcare. And you all know that we accept regularly sources of systemic errors. Dr. Chan's presentation yesterday in radiology, I just loved his metaphor of put 2 rubber bands around my biopsies. Remember that? And then he showed the picture of the cart by the grossing station with all the buckets and pots and things with rubber bands around them holding the test requisition there. We accept the fact that rubber bands break, and we're going to have to try and figure this all out. So, key point here is when the Institute of Medicine issues one of these kinds of reports, it's a signal that policymakers are going to put a lot of energy and effort into getting providers to think differently and act differently in their environment. Okay, so I'm going to read you about 4 or 5 quotes that have come out of the press releases and the abstracts of the document. You can order the document. It's going to come out as a book. It's about a $75 order. You can find it on the IOM's webpage. But I'm going to read these things, and I'd like you to listen carefully to the language, because this is taking us in a very different direction. Americans would be better served by a more nimble healthcare system that is consistently reliable, high quality, and that constantly, systematically, and seamlessly improves. In short, the country needs healthcare that learns by avoiding past mistakes and adopting newfound successes. By one estimate, almost 75,000 needless deaths would have been averted in 2005 if every state in the Union had delivered care on par with the best performing state. So there you have them laying out that same kind of to err is human, quantifiable estimate of the number of deaths that happen because the healthcare system does not perform to its potential. Current waste diverts resources. The committee estimates $750 billion in unnecessary health spending in 2009 alone. And remember, in 2009, the healthcare spend was about 1.7, 1.8 trillion. It's about 2.2, I think, in 2011. Now, you all know the term business intelligence. It relates to creating those dashboards and using informatics to guide management. IOM says decision support tools and knowledge management systems can be included routinely in healthcare delivery to ensure that decisions are informed by the best evidence. And Karen has given us some great examples of what's happening at North Shore Health System in that same regard. This is a clarion call that informatics needs to begin to sort out all of these disparate sources of information and provide them in a coherent fashion to clinicians and people managing the process in real time. Role of business intelligence. This is another quote from their material. Healthcare delivery organizations should develop organizational cultures that encourage continuous improvement by incorporating best practices, transparency, open communication, staff empowerment, coordination, teamwork, mutual respect, and to align incentives accordingly. And for some of you who have been familiar with and practicing with things like Lean and Six Sigma process improvement, these are all the key words that really are foundational to that. Now, there's 7 slides I'm going to show you here, and these are from the IOM's own presentation. You can download these graphics. And the point that the IOM is making in this report is that outside of healthcare, other industries are very quick to adopt innovations and deploy them in ways that improve the the customer experience and raise quality. And in this example here, they're saying that 20% of patients reported that test results or medical records were not transferred from one place to another in time for an appointment. 25% of patients said their healthcare provider has had to reorder tests to have accurate information for diagnosis. And in other industries, online banking allows customers to view their entire financial history and credit transactions in seconds from literally any place in the world they can access the internet or an ATM. Here's create systems to manage complexity. I found this very interesting. 229 other doctors are involved in treating one primary care physician's pool of patients. And so 180 activities are managed by clinicians in intensive care. And they point out that in manufacturing, you have very complex systems that are managed in real time with high accuracy. Make healthcare safer. They got the airlines on one side. 1/3 of hospital patients are harmed during their stay. 1/5 of Medicare patients are rehospitalized within 30 days. Meanwhile, the airlines are actually performing landings and takeoffs at approaching 7 sigma perfection, which is less than 1 negative event per million opportunities. Improved transparency. 63% of patients don't know how much their health care costs until they get the bill. 10% of patients never find out what it cost them to get their care. And of course, in other industries, you can get price information that's very detailed very quickly. Promote teamwork and communication. 50% of adults report problems with care coordination, notification of test results, and communication among their doctors. 1/3 of adults say healthcare system is poorly organized. We wonder why so few recognize that, eh? Mission control teams in other industries work constantly to coordinate multiple engineers and experts for a successful launch and mission. And then we have two more. Partner with patients. Less than half the patients receive clear information about the benefits and trade-offs of treatments for their conditions. And less than half of patients are satisfied with their level of control in decision-making. And they give the example of home builders. If you're building a custom home, the home builder is very good at delivering exactly the product you want that meets your specifications. And then the last one here is decrease waste and inefficiency. 1/3 of healthcare expenditures are estimated to be waste. In other industries, factory assembly lines continually monitor, improve quality, identify efficiencies, and remove waste. Now, this is all coming from the Institute of Medicine. They've given you 7 models where industry has done very well at achieving what in that particular domain healthcare has lacked. And that's the message that I want to carry with you about this Institute of Medicine report. They are setting the scene to take hospitals, physicians, laboratories, and other providers down this path of continuous improvement. And for those of you who had studied W. Edwards Deming, he had a definition for quality. Quality is what the customer defines. And so in order for any business to understand whether they're meeting quality or not, they have to ask the customer. Thus, you remember when the Joint Commission, used to be JACO, implemented the patient surveys and said, you have to survey your patients about their experience, and when we come back in 2 years, you have to show us that you've improved those performance measures, that patients are happier with what you've done. This was the start of taking our healthcare system down a path where patients define quality. So, I think everyone in this room absolutely understands informatics is the necessary foundation for all of this. And so the message here is that you will be doing your particular healthcare organizations a favor to carry forth this mindset of continuous improvement, innovation, and going outside healthcare to look for innovative ways to raise quality and improve the patient experience and outcomes. Okay, learning organization does mean a different management culture, because we have tolerated ongoing errors. Every lab loses specimens every day, correct? Deming was the one who said there is a statistical rate at which your system loses lab specimens every day. And if you will apply these tools ranging from Lean and Six Sigma, you can eliminate the source of the statistical variability and bring that down to lower levels. And I think that in this whole coming cycle of the learning culture emphasis, labs will be amongst the leaders, because labs have always been very good at using data to manage workflow in the lab and to look at the quality of test results through QA/QC. Okay, with that as a preface now, I'm going to shift gears and get back to the more primary focus. I know some of you see this magazine. I've read it for more than a decade. It's a very interesting look at what's happening in hospitals and physician offices as their primary focus. And every winter they tend to do a tech trends issue. And what caught my attention this year is their 2012 issue. They had 10 trends. And when I looked at these trends, I thought this is very, very different, because for the first time the trends weren't about how do you use the technology. Now remember, they're writing to chief information officers. It wasn't about how you're using technology and whether you should be bringing in these new kinds of hardware solutions. Rather, each one of these was, there's something going on in healthcare and you'd better reposition your IT department to be providing that solution to your parent organization. So in my view, that's the context for this. And I'll go through these 10 items and give you some of my thoughts about them. The first one, number 1, is performance improvement imperatives. And the quote that they wrote was, more patient care organization leaders now recognize that deep process change will be required to prepare their organizations for healthcare-related reform mandates. Now, This is what they picked out last February as the #1 thing that's pushing CIOs in hospital and health systems. And coincidentally, that matches what the Institute of Medicine's report is launching our healthcare system on. So I would suggest to you that supporting process improvement in your labs with your IT platform is going to be a necessary thing. Now, labs have always been good at using data to guide workflow and also to look at the quality. But it's going to be increasingly important for the hospital C-suite and the physicians to have access to that same kind of data. In my view, it's no coincidence that over the last decade we've seen middleware purchased and deployed in clinical labs since about the year 2000 with increasing frequency. And some of you that I've addressed in past pathology informatics meetings, my comment is the LIS vendors were both reluctant and very expensive and very time-consuming to try and work through to get those solutions. So labs would go to an outside vendor, buy a middleware piece that connected, let's say, an automation line to some LIS and give them a real-time capability. And what we have coming out now is a new class of middleware with management dashboards. Some of you who were in Dr. Tiffany's session yesterday afternoon heard him talking about HC1.com out of Indianapolis. They have what they call a lab CRM solution, and in 18 months they've got 60 hospital labs that are in the process of purchasing or deploying this solution. And you can think of it really as an integrator, because it's telling management with the real-time dashboards what's going on with workflow, which doctors in the outreach environment may have not sent the same number of specimens today versus last week, and how they can intervene if that's going to be a lost account, for example. So there's a quality and a workflow aspect to this. There's a customer management and satisfaction aspect to this. And as we all know, the legacy IT systems out there are very difficult for you to unlock the data that sits in them. The lab's role in this trend #1 about continuous improvement is the fact that, as I've mentioned before, labs are very good at managing the data, but they're also information rich. However, as we all have heard over the last few days, unlocking that data from today's generation of LIS is very difficult. And so that's why you get these stories like Karen was presentation showing you how they're trying to use what's in the computer and with real time inform the clinicians how to do a better job of ordering the right test at the right moment. We have a meeting coming up November 6th and 7th. It'll be our 7th annual Lab Quality Confab. And for some of you that would like to know more about how labs are using the informatics platform to advance Lean and Six Sigma, that would be a very good opportunity. We'll have probably about 40 to 50 speakers and 40 sessions. So this is #2. Population health management and readmissions. Now again, this is healthcare informatics, saying the #2 trend we think CIOs should be responding to is positioning their IT infrastructure to support this. And in my view, the readmissions initiatives by Medicare in particular are the short-term goal to get providers, both the hospitals and the physicians, to focus on, are we doing the right thing, and when somebody's discharged, is the handoff happening smoothly so the patient gets the follow-up care. In the long term, I think your ACOs and your integrated care organizations are where they want health care to end up. So these kinds of programs are just as prevalent in the private payer community as they are with Medicare. And what was written about this by Modern Healthcare was reducing avoidable readmissions has become one of the most pressing issues for hospitals as they look to become accountable care organizations. And in the last few months, some numbers were released, and I believe it was about $400 million in readmission penalties were being assessed by the Medicare program for hospitals that did not meet their readmission goals. So, if you're in the lab world, and you know that your parent organization needs to manage the population, reduce readmissions, your contribution, it's immediate How do you make real-time lab data available to clinicians, which is probably going to be mobile and wireless, and we're going to talk a little bit that in a minute. But I believe that pathologists and your laboratory scientists, your PhDs and the MTs, really need a richer full-time, real-time access to the data and need to be extroverts in helping the physicians within the hospital. Workflow dashboards are one solution. I've seen a number of innovative hospital labs develop for this, and I think we'll see them become more common. For pathology groups, patient-wide management and readmissions has some interesting challenges, in particular because as you form ACOs, now you have a integrated care organization with hospital inpatient care and then the outpatient outreach care, all trying to interact and maintain continuity of care. For pathologists, they've had one foot inside the hospital and one foot inside the office community for many decades, and they're going to need to figure out where their place is in the ACO. And there's going to be a patient pathway, and pathologists need to develop the best places for them to add value to the clinicians in that pathway. And I think it goes without saying with this audience that small pathology groups are going to need to have very robust informatics solutions in order to play in these different environments. Tech trend number 3, private health information exchanges. I found this one to be interesting because mostly the attention goes to these large statewide initiatives, usually put together by what you would say are not-for-profit entities. And what modern or healthcare informatics was talking about is that even payers are beginning to develop what are effectively a regional health information exchange and loading data into it. And that hospitals and health systems are uncertain players in this because, you know, they all like to control the data. Whoever controls the data gets to make the rules is the perspective in some of these organizations. So I suspect that we're going to see a number of privately managed HIEs emerge. They may not be large in terms of regional coverage, but they're going to be they're going to get a high rate of participation by the physicians and the institutions that were in that region. And of course, lab test data is the glue that holds all that together. Okay, if there's HIEs, those of you, just out of curiosity, how many of you work in an environment now where your institution, your lab is feeding data into an HIE? Let's see a show of hands. So, geez, less than 5%. What you're going to find is that doctors like pulling lab data out of an HIE once it's up and running. And I'll give you the example. In South Indiana, along the Ohio River, there's an HIE. I don't remember what the name of it is. It's been operating now for 5 or 6 years. It's like 3 counties south of Indianapolis. And I talked to the executive director of this HIE, and I said, how has this changed things? He said, well, for one thing, the physicians who are participating in the HIE now have shortened their callbacks to patients for appointments. So instead of seeing somebody on Tuesday and having them come back the next week, because they got quicker access to lab test data, mostly from local hospital labs, they've said to the person, you're here Tuesday, come back Friday. I'll have the lab results, we'll get going. So there's some practical practice benefits that have come out of these smaller HIEs. And then, of course, you know we have the Tower of Babel, that every lab's test catalog and methodologies don't easily map to another lab's. And then some HIEs are being designed to accommodate electronic orders. Don't need to say much on LOINC. You've lived with that for too long. Number 4, the business model of healthcare turned inside out. What that means is goodbye fee for service. And hospitals and physicians really don't understand what's going to happen next. But if you change the money, you change the behavior. So as you can see here, models of healthcare like ACOs and medical homes are designed to improve the patient experience and begin to attack some of the fundamental flaws in how we've delivered healthcare over the last few decades. There will be more integration and interaction between hospitals and office-based physicians. and the ability to access data and analyze it in useful ways, both at the population level and then bring it down to the patient, is going to be essential. Now, I've got a few slides here that I think you're going to find very interesting. This summer from the Brookings Institute and the Dartmouth Institute, it shows that there's now approximately 250 self-identified ACOs. There's a growing number of private ACOs which are contracting with private health insurance companies, and this gives you an idea that they're clustered, many of them along the California coast, a bit up there in the Northwest, and then in the Northeast and Florida are the most active regions of the United States for ACOs. So this is not likely to be a model that goes away quickly. Now, I wanted to show you some things about medical homes. And as you all know, medical homes is designed to reduce the gaps in care and also develop a proactive management of the patient. Early diagnosis, active intervention, and the electronic health record and the ability to move the lab test data around are essentials to this. So I think that the next slide you're going to find quite interesting. I picked this up about 2 years ago. This is an oncology practice in Philadelphia. They had just issued a press release that they had achieved their accreditation as a medical home, and they were bragging about what they'd accomplished with a comment about money. So as you can see, in 2005, 12% of their chemo patients were referred to emergency rooms. But by 2009, that had dropped to just 5%. And they also noted that their hospital admissions had dropped 16% in 2009 and 10% in 2010. Now, the point I want to make here is, where do hospitals generate revenue? Inpatient admissions, right? You have a medical home boasting about how they're keeping people out of both the ER and the hospital admissions. This is going to be a consequence for hospitals that's going to be very difficult for them financially. And then the bottom quote is the one that's really interesting, because the physician who was the CEO of the group made the comment that under the current reimbursement arrangements, they made more money putting people in the ER and the hospitals and doing the follow-up care than they did keeping out. So he said that the payment system didn't reward the doctors in his group for preventing the patients from having acute episodes. Now, I copied this slide from Dr. James Crawford, who's the chair of pathology at North Shore Jewish Long Island. And what's interesting about this slide is that he's talking about, this was published in the PCPC, I don't remember that one, but you've got the URL here, the link for this. But these are medical homes, group health, many of you know, 16% decrease, Geisinger, 18% decrease in hospital admissions, VA Midwest, I believe that's the Chicago, Milwaukee, 27% decrease. Health Partners, there's your Harvard Medical Group, Mass General, etc., 24% decrease. Intermountain Healthcare, 25% decrease in hospital admissions. What's the message for people that are hospital administrators? If we do a better job of preventive care, people are not going to the hospital as frequently as they used to. So this is why healthcare informatics picked this as a trend. The CIOs have to begin to make data available to support more preventive and interventional care as opposed to reactive care. Number 5, bridging the care transition gap just follows up what we talked about relative to handoffs where the patient suffers because the patient was not followed up properly the way the system would expect them to be. And IT collaboration tools are going to be a key to this. The ability for the lab data to be viewed as necessary and in real time is going to be essential to that. You can see here that if you're in a primary care group and you have a pool of patients that you're managing, you really do need IT to help you coordinate what every member of the care team's doing. Some of the nurses are going to be calling people like Robert to say, okay, now that you reach 50 years old, here are the kind of screenings that you should be doing. We haven't seen you come in, or you haven't reported your weight in 6 months. We want all that information. If somebody's diabetic, they'll be watching hemoglobin A1Cs, etc. So as you can see, these three elements here, you need to avoid duplication of care, at the same time making sure that everything that Robert as a patient should get happens. So how does this work in real life? Here's a story that we wrote in the Dark Report in 2009. Kaiser, Mayo, Cleveland Clinic, Geisinger, Intermountain Healthcare are models that were studied to develop the ACO model that Medicare is moving towards. And here's an example of how this care integration actually delivers results. So the goal here was to reduce hospital readmissions for cardiology patients. And the interesting thing is 73% fewer deaths was one of the outcomes. They had 12,000 patients enrolled in what they call the Collaborative Cardiac Care Services Program, and the number of patients meeting cholesterol goal went from 26% to 73%. They did an integration of lab testing with this whole care continuum. So point of care was a role at COAG clinics. Cholesterol testing was done according to evidence-based guidelines, and the lab was part of making sure that the patient got the follow-up on the timely basis. So what hospital informatics said about this is that hospital's role is not going to be so much the acute and episodic care provider, but it will be a pay-it-forward role dynamic of providing information that the next provider of care needs and what it can do to make that transfer of information successful. So if you think about the hospital CIO, this is a different role for hospital informatics, because they're going to have to push data to the next level of providers for the patient who's been discharged. What's interesting is most hospitals have a laboratory outreach program that already can send lab test data directly to physician offices in the community around. So labs are positioned for this. Okay, number 6, privacy and security. This one really caught me by surprise. How many of you have an institution that has a Chief Security Information Officer? UPMC. Okay, so around this room, this is a trend that's happening. And it's the HITECH Act and protected information that's at the root of this, and the fact that the Department of Health and Human Services is doing more audits, which are surprise audits, as people come in and want to look at how you've been handling data. So this is something for labs, because many labs are enabling wireless devices and mobile computing to access the lab test data. Healthcare informatics determined that 60% of the respondents in one study said their institutions were spending more money on IT security. And if they're spending money, you know it's a problem. Second generation clinical decision support. This is another interesting one. You have all spent several days talking about how to unlock lab test data and present it to the physicians so that they can use it in an optimal way. And this whole session, this whole trend was devoted to the fact that first generation clinical decision support didn't work. You heard Karen reference the fact that there was it was for our friend from Emory, that there was too many alerts. And so the physicians get fatigue alerts and they begin to ignore them all. So there's a lot of optimism that second generation clinical decision support is going to overcome some of those fundamental problems, but also, besides organizing clinical data, needs to support optimal workflow. And we've all heard the problem with EHRs and EMRs impeding the physician's preferred workflow. Well, clinical decision support is going to have that same challenge. For clinical and path labs, I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't discussed over the last 3 days. The avalanche of data that you're going to throw at clinicians as they work up patients using more molecular and more genetic-based diagnostic tests, there's not an easy solution for this unless you computerize it. Companion diagnostics. We just published a story. Some of you may know Catherine Tynan, PhD, who has her own consultancy. She does a lot of consulting, particularly for pharma and biotech, as well as some of the clinical and IVD companies. She's predicting that you're going to see cancer patients managed with cocktails of therapeutic drugs like we do the HIV patients. And that as the tumors evolve in their own dynamics, you will want to revise the mix of therapeutic drugs. And she points out not only the trouble for clinicians to figure out when they need to change the mix, but that the mix is expensive. You may be talking about 3 to 5 drugs that cost $50,000 to $100,000 per course of treatment. So these are opportunities for the lab, and they tie into these trends. And so I would suggest to you that there's a lot of value to be gained by pathology and clinical laboratory professionals to take a larger role in developing evidence-based medicine guidelines on how the tests are to be ordered and interpreted and followed up on. Imaging informatics in the enterprise. Lots of discussion about that here in the last few days, and here's what modern or healthcare informatics said about that. Remember, being read by hospital CIOs, that there's an explosion of digital images, and it's not just in radiology or digital pathology, it's across a lot of specialties. They note that physicians in some settings are actually accessing as many as 3 to 4 different viewers, and the capabilities of PACS are being outrun by this profusion of different images. And so for digital pathology, obviously you can't expect EMRs to handle digital pathology images. The EMR fellows can hardly handle accepting clinical test results. HI says you must address workflow and management issues that typically do not match up across all the departments. You know, Dr. Chan yesterday talking about how he liked his workflow to be organized is going to be very different than how you would work up a case using digital images. And then this is the first time I'd heard the term vendor-neutral archive systems. HI was observing that there's no emerging favorite in vendor-neutral archiving with that. So, for pathology groups, I see a little window of time, since there's confusion in this area, there's an opportunity to set up some digital capabilities and get it established, because before too long goes away, then the CIOs of the hospital are going to create a solution that may not be appropriate for pathology. And you're going to see the need to archive and make accessible a whole variety of digital images that serve a whole different number of medical specialties. Number 9, mobile health or bring your own device. And this won't be a surprise to all of you, but from the hospital CIO perspective, how do they control it? And you can see from these bullet points, 75% of CIOs surveyed said their organization allows clinicians to access clinical data via a mobile device. So that shows you that this cat's pretty much out of the bag. On the other side, 38% of institutions have a policy in place that articulates what the strategy is and manages it in some fashion or another. For labs, you don't have robust solutions for supporting this. It's still the Wild West. One CIO declared, though, because he needs a fix, if I told physicians that they couldn't bring their own mobile devices, I'd be shot. So again, this is a trend that's outrun hospital CIO's ability to control it. For labs, you already know that you have many office-based physicians and hospital settings accessing lab test results with mobile devices. And my suggestion is it's increasingly simple to create apps that you can do through the iPhone and the Android store. You may find it very smart to take certain tests that you know get misinterpreted and create an app that they can download on their iPad or smartphone and use with certain patients in those specifics. And you can create as many apps as you think appropriate relative to some of the specialties that you serve in larger numbers. And I think, obviously, cloud and apps is something that's going to be very disruptive to your existing lab information system vendors. Because I see companies like HC1 that we mentioned earlier beginning to build something that's totally in the cloud, it's totally built around Java, and it's modular. You can plug anything into it and it just keeps broadening because it's the channel to bring those plugins into the dashboard. Okay, number 10. HI called this the game changer, personalized medicine. And these are some good quotes. I want to read you this first one. The convergence of emerging genetic medicine and electronic health records is a development that requires immediate attention by hospital and healthcare CEOs. So the message here is all of you as laboratory professionals have an ally at Healthcare Informatics telling the hospital CIOs they'd better deal with the molecular onslaught. Most CIOs, they observed, are not ready for what will be personalized medicine. And the EMR systems have to be able to accommodate some subset of genetic data in a way that's useful to the physicians. So they said at this time, the electronic health record system has no fields ready to be populated by genetic data. And does anybody here know of a certified EHR that actually is prepared for genetic data? If there are. So this is a trend that's right on. So at Ohio State University, in a project with Coriell to study genetics, they actually have put in their genetic risk reports as PDF files. And then those files are attached to patients' records in the EHR the same way that imaging files. So you're seeing workarounds on this. Now, that's the 10 trends, and I want to make sure I don't overstay my time because I know many of you are off to the airport very quickly. This is the tech trends from Healthcare Informatics in 2009, and I thought you'd find it interesting how in 36 months the advice this magazine's giving to CIOs has evolved. Because you have a clinical transformation, doing more with less, i.e. how do you save money? How do you integrate your medical devices? Is your data good? Are you supporting telemedicine? Oh geez, Web 2.0's out there. Do you have portals for your physicians and your patients? Business intelligence, tracking technologies. None of these things, think about that like barcodes and RFIDs on inventory that moves around the hospital. Really, none of these are talking about the 10 trends that they were presenting this year, which is CIO. Is your informatics platform even capable of supporting the way your institution and your clinicians need to be practicing medicine and handling workflow? And to me, this is a very major sign of how fast we're going to evolve healthcare over the next 5 to 8 years relative to what most of us have seen in our career. It's going to be highly disruptive. I'm going to close up with a few slides here, and I'm going to give you the Quest and the LabCorp dilemma. Okay? Quest and LabCorp are the large publicly traded laboratories. They are the end result of about 30 years of consolidation and acquisition. I can go back to the 1980s and mention names like MetPath, Nichols Institute, where I worked, Damon Clinical Labs, Roche Biomedical, National Health Labs, Allied Clinical Labs. All of those labs live today, but they live either under LabCorp or Quest because of acquisitions. Now here's the point I want to make. Commercial laboratories have lived from the lab test referrals that come from office-based physicians. And in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the vast majority of office-based physicians were partners in their practice or shareholders in a professional corporation. In other words, they owned their medical group. What has been happening over the last 3 or 4 years is a large proportion of office-based physicians are shifting their practice structure away from a partner practice to an employee practice. This has consequences, because if a hospital buys a medical group practice, turns all the docs into employees, the hospital's going to control where the lab test referrals go. So I'm going to show you the Quest and LabCorp dilemma here. This data comes from the Center for Studying Health System Change, and it's 2008, and it shows you the makeup in the United States, and at that time 73% of physicians were practicing in an office-based setting. 32% is 2 offices or solo, 15% is 3 to 5 docs, 19% 6 to 50 docs, and then large groups 6%. These were all your employee model docs, group or staff HMOs, community health center, medical school, university, and hospital. Now, here's what happens. This is from the Medical Group Management Association. This was published in the last 18 months. And this is the trend in hospital ownership of medical practices. And they used the word compelling. These numbers are up through 2008. And here are hospital-owned physicians going from 20% up to 50% in 2008. And this is the physician ownership going from 70% down to about 48%. And we've had 4 more years of this kind of acquisition to reduce independent physician ownership even more. That's shown in this chart that comes from the New England Journal of Medicine. It was last November 2011 this was produced. In the year 2000, specialists, about 5% were employed, and this has already moved up to 15% in 2008. They predict to be 25% by 12, and primary care physicians are moving up to 40%. So this is the Quest and the LabCorp problem. How do you sell a doctor's office on your lab services if the owner of the doctor's office is the hospital or health system and they have their own lab they'd like to do that testing? But it also shows you the way the practice structure of office-based physicians is shifting. No longer are they essentially independent businessmen running their professional corporation. They're employees in an integrated healthcare delivery organization. So I'll close up with this. Personalized and precision. I think over the next year or two, you're going to hear the term precision medicine more frequently than personalized medicine, because that is what patients want you to practice. Be precise with who I am and what my condition is. We all know it's the lab test that drives what the doctor's going to do with the patient. And so, in my view, it's not just the data, but it's the interpretation and the consultative component that's going to give pathologists value added and earn them adequate reimbursement to deliver clinical services. Some of you know Medicare has a bundled pilot project out there. So since last September 11, they have asked providers to submit a proposal that for this clinical service, these providers, hospital physicians, etc., will bid a flat rate. Think of it like a DRG. 2 of the 3 bundle descriptions include putting lab and radiology tests into the bundle. So how does a lab get paid if the bundle is to treat, let's say, a cardiology patient who's been discharged from the hospital and there's maybe 3 months worth of post-hospital care in the bundle? How does the lab defend what money it should be paid? This is why pathologists need to become consultative in what value they add. So, finally, reimbursements, fee-for-service is going away. You'll have new opportunities to be paid and demonstrate value, but I think you're going to find informatics and information technology underlines that. And I'm going to declare that you're going to see more change in the next 10 years than the healthcare system's seen probably between World War II and the present. And the admonition is that change is not bad. Change means opportunity. But change means opportunity if you don't stick with the status quo. So I've got a quiz for you. Who is that gentleman? Speak up. Okay. Look what he says. In a chronically leaking boat, energy devoted to changing vessels is more productive than energy devoted to patching leaks. For the profession of pathology, this may have much wisdom. Who's this gentleman? Speak up. Hey, just what year did Wayne retire? Does anybody know? It's got to be more than a decade ago, but see, we still recognize him. Now, what's the quote Wayne Gretzky is famous for? Why do you score so many goals? Well, I skate where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is. But listen to this one. You miss 100% of the shots that you never take. So I'm going to leave you with those two admonitions from some very respected folks and say thank you for being an attentive audience, and I hope these 10 trends in the IOM report have given you a more useful perspective on what your institutions and organizations face. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a couple of questions from Bob, and then I just want to do a few thank yous, and we'll let you all go. So, anybody have any questions for Bob?
I answered them